I have to give huge props to Ilya Calderon, who's joining us today. Did I just butcher your name in Spanish? I hope not. Okay. And Maria Martinez Guzman, who both came, Maria from Miami, and Ilya, who has been covering Houston for the last 3 days. Ilya drove 4 hours to get out of Houston. Well, why don't you tell the story? What is Houston like right now? I thought since they're here
pretty
in
bad.
Vice,
It is. The situation is really, really bad. I had to drive 3 hours just to get out of the city, and then took the highway 4 hours. We drove to Dallas, and then we flew in first time in the morning.
we're hearing on the news media here that people are being picked up, and it's not the sort of sheltering disaster that there was with Katrina. Does that seem accurate from where you're reporting?
It could seem like something like Katrina. It could be one of the 10 worst disasters in the country. It could be one of the 10.
Have you run into any Katrina survivors
we
who
both
ended up?
covered Katrina, but not this time in Houston. I didn't see any survivor from Katrina.
Wow, it's an amazing story. How deep is the water there now?
The water, some areas 10 feet,
Wow.
some areas 4, 5. So it depends on the location, according to the bayous.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is really bad.
So how do you report on a situation like that where you're covered, where there's water everywhere? Where do you go to actually file the reports? How does that happen? Maria, you're in charge of the news gathering. How do you organize that?
We try to get our satellite trucks, our live views, as close as possible to where we have our correspondents. And it does become a challenge. For instance, I had a satellite truck stuck in one side of the city, one side of downtown in Houston, and I had 5 news crews in the other side, and they couldn't get through. We couldn't get one through the other. So we literally had to use one live view and share it among all the crews so they can file their stories, and I had a satellite truck with, nothing. For us, I also want to make this point. It's very challenging to cover a story like Harvey, because not only are we trying to get what's happening with the disaster, but because of SB4 that's going to be implemented in Texas on Friday, a lot of our audience, which happen to be undocumented, are very scared. They're very scared to go to the shelters because they feel like they're going to be asked for their papers. They're very scared to evacuate because they don't know if the authorities are going to put them in deportation orders. So for our crews, it's just not also trying to report the story, but having them trying to reach out and say, hey, we kind of have to do that dual thing of not just reporting, but saying, there are shelters out there where the authorities are saying they're not going to ask for your paperwork. So we they get our audience, they're getting their news from us, and at the same time, they're trying to trust us in telling them what is going on.
Okay. For those that don't know, what is SB4?
SB4 is a new law that's going to be implemented in Texas on Friday, which basically says that law enforcement can ask your immigration status. So it comes in a very challenging time.
Wow, right. So, wow, and here we are, Vice. Hello. So we're joined by Tracy Jarrett, who's a J-12, and Josh Davis, who's a former adjunct here at the journalism school, now teaching at the New School, and Zachary Caldwell, who was the cameraman on the Vice sequence. So we sent out links to both. I guess this is the first time you're all meeting each other, so hi, everybody. Hi. We sent out links, so hopefully the students have had a chance to watch both documentaries, but I wanted to sort of, while the Vice crew is sort of getting their breath, I mean, one of the things that I know that goes on in newsrooms when you start pitching these kinds of stories is there's usually some sort of vibrant discussion about whether one should in fact cover a story about neo-Nazis or KKK. What was the rationale behind choosing to do the stories that each of your networks did at this particular point in time? Maybe Maria, you could start, so Josh and Tracy, you can catch your breath while you're coming in.
Yeah. Again, for our audience, I don't think that a lot of them are very knowledgeable or they don't know much about the neo-Nazi groups, the KKK in the United States. So when we think about, we brainstorm in our editorial room, there was this whole thing about these Confederacy statutes coming down. There was a huge rally on July 8th in which this particular group that we wanted to try to interview, which is the White Knights of the KKK, they had done a rally, about 1,000 people showed up. It had gone, somewhat violent, but, still within control. So we sat around and we talked about, should we present or try to do more stories like this to our audience and try to show them that these hate groups in 2017 are not only out there, but they're expanding. And we brought up the discussion, and lo and behold, Ilya suggested that she go and she do it, that she would love to do it.
Was there any discussion about whether or not covering these groups would amplify their message?
Absolutely. At first, I think in every newsroom, you give them a voice by doing this story. Are you kind of helping them get their message out there or spreading their hate? But at the same time, again, we felt that it was important for our audience to know that these groups existed, and that not only do they exist, that they're growing in numbers. And under the Trump administration, their numbers have grown. That's a reality.
Josh and Tracy, was there a similar discussion in the Vice newsroom?
Yeah, from the beginning. I mean, anytime we do an alt-right or white nationalist story, we absolutely talk about whether that's signal boosting, whether it's appropriate for us to report on that or not, and how we report on that. I totally agree. I think we have the same conversations in our newsroom that you do in yours. The scary part about being in Charlottesville was seeing the numbers of white nationalists outnumbering counter-protesters at least 3-1 on the streets of Charlottesville, and sort of giving voice to the idea that they are growing in numbers, and we're sort of reporting on what we're seeing there with regard to that.
Was there anybody in the Vice newsroom that didn't think it was a good idea?
I think in all fairness, I mean, we knew that we were going to go cover a story about the alt-right and white supremacists, but I don't think going into it we had any idea exactly what this would turn out to be. And so I don't know that there were a lot of people saying, no, don't go tell this story. I think for most people, even in our newsroom, it was, this is interesting. What is this really about? Let's go find out.
Okay. How did you get access?
Ellie Reeves has been reporting on the alt-right white nationalists for 2 years now. We've been reporting on a number of different cases, one of them being the SPLC lawsuit against Andrew Anglin of the Daily Stormer. We've created a body of work so far reporting on some of the figures in this emerging white nationalist movement, and developing those sources has led us to interviewing Chris Cantwell throughout the weekend.
And they referenced that in talking with Ellie, like, hey, I saw your interview with Richard Spencer. Hey, I know that I don't agree with you, but I know that you at least listen, and will give us a fair shot to get our story out there and whatever we believe to be true. So I think there's a lot of trust that she built over time that allowed the access.
Okay. Maria, how did you get access?
We called a hotline. When we were doing our research into these KKK, the White Knights of the KKK, there was a number. It said, to call this number if you want to join the Klan. Obviously, none of us wanted to join the Klan, but I did call. I identified myself. I said, who I was, that I was calling on behalf of Univision, and that we wanted to have a sit-down interview with them. And lo and behold, I would say not even 45 minutes later, they were calling me back.
Wow. So it was that quick?
Calling me back. That was that quick. And then I told them, that I had a Hispanic correspondent, woman of color, who wanted to interview them. And they didn't understand that a Hispanic woman of color happens to be a Black Hispanic.
So they just didn't understand
They
the term.
didn't understand. They did not get that. They told me.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah.
This doesn't exist.
Yeah,
for
she
him.
seems to be something that they were not, used to,
Not
or
a woman of color.
So how do you prep to go in? And Zach, I'd like to pull you in on this
Yeah,
conversation. How do you've covered these kinds of demonstrations before?
This was my first.
Okay.
I mean, I had been to protests before. I'd shot photographs at demonstrations and things, but this was a bit different. I mean, we had, we made sure that we had the proper safety gear, gas masks and vests and helmets. And in terms of camera stuff, it's just, you know, being ready to pull out an extra backup lens, you know, being ready with cloth to clean off the lens, with filters to switch out, all of those things, which isn't terribly different than what we would normally do for any shoot, but it, you know, it's just a little bit heightened. And it's also making sure we're in constant communication. I mean, oftentimes covering an event, not like a protest, you know, one of our cameramen might end up down the street or whatever, and we might not be in contact with them for an hour or something like that. In this case, that could be catastrophic, right? That could be really problematic both for the story and for one's safety. So we're just constantly in contact, making sure we have an action plan to get out of, you know, whatever
Get
situation
out of the situation
that is.
if you have to. You know.
Yeah, so
Somebody has to remember to pay attention, right?
Yeah.
Maria, you mentioned, I remember either one of you, I remember going in, there's a shot of your cameraman sort of arguing with you about the uncertainty that he feels walking in. What was that
But
conversation?
even before that, I want her to tell you guys how I prepped her. I had
But
Scott.
one of our cameramen, Scott, which is American, he wanted to prepare me for the insults that I was going to receive. So he started in the car. We had the GoPro camera there. And he says, I started asking him questions. You know, he was a prop, like he was
Yeah.
a KKK guy that I was going to interview.
I told him that he had to be very nasty to her, to try to, you know, that's how I was going to get her ready, to try to insult her. But he even felt bad. He told me
felt
himself.
he couldn't do it. He said the N word and that's it. He says, like, I can't do this. I cannot tell you, you know, I cannot be like, I cannot pose like I was a KKK.
Yeah, that was because I felt from the beginning when I heard their hotline and the way they spoke to me on the phone and their derogatory terms they used. I knew they were going to insult her, and I wanted her to be ready for it because she had never been insulted or treated the way she was treated. So I felt like we owed it to her to somehow get her ready. And the
Even after.
And
I decided to stay in the car because I didn't want to jeopardize the interview. If he sees me or if I say something, if I have any contact with him, and if I say something, he maybe get upset and cancel the interview. So I didn't want to have any contact with him before. And they were shooting the house, images of the house
We actually want to show
inside.
that. I want to show that sequence now, and then want to show also the first couple of minutes of the Vice story. So this is probably from about 4 minutes in.
That took place on July 8th.
Lights?
That we
How do I do the light? Sorry.
Okay.
A lot of moving parts. We just have a brand-new lecture hall, and we're still figuring out how to use it, so.
traveled to North Carolina with the intention of learning more about one of the supremacist groups that had organized it, the Loyal White Knights, a branch of the Ku Klux Klan.
Decidí llamar. Nunca pensé que me iban a llamar de regreso. Entonces le dije que yo era una productora del noticiero Univisión y que tenía una corresponsal, una mujer hispana de color, que quería entrevistarlos si ellos nos daban una entrevista. Me dijeron que sí.
The interview was confirmed. However, among the production crew, there was uncertainty. Above all, because carrying it out carried the risk that it could turn violent. They would not give us their address, but they demanded that we arrive at this restaurant in the town of Yanceyville on July 24th at 6 p.m. Our team of 4 arrived in 2 vans.
Éramos un camarógrafo mexicano, un camarógrafo americano, Elia, y yo que soy cubana.
Suddenly, 2 women appeared in a car and asked us to follow them through a remote road. After a half hour, we came to a house that serves as the headquarters of the group. And where they proudly exhibit the symbols they most revere.
Ilia opta por quedarse en el carro. Nosotros firmamos adentro de la casa donde tenían todo tipo de cosas que eran horrorosas, como una estatua de de alguien de color con un melón, con una soga al cuello.
It is the home of Christopher Barker, Imperial Wizard of the Loyal White Knights, and his wife Amanda Barker, Imperial Commander. Other members of the group accompanied them.
Camarógrafo americano empieza a hablar en español porque él habla español. Ellos como que estaban como que este es un traidor, ¿no? Enseguida ellos empezaron a usar un lenguaje totalmente inaceptable para cualquiera de nosotros.
La sorpresa fue mayor cuando vieron a nuestro camarógrafo mexicano.
Le preguntan, ¿tú qué? ¿Eres mexicano? Y le dice, sí, yo soy mexicano. El otro camarógrafo como tuvo que interceder un poco para decirle, sí, es mexicano, pero es alguien compañero de muchos años y un compañero que ha estado conmigo en las peores situaciones. A mí desde el principio me trataron mucho mejor que lo que trataron al camarógrafo mexicano.
And then, first couple of minutes of Vice I also want to show, which was a very different style of film because they were covering a news event as it happened. Yes,
I'm here to spread ideas, talk, in the hopes that somebody more capable will come along and do that. Somebody like Donald Trump who does not give his daughter to a Jew.
So Donald Trump, but like more racist.
A lot more racist than Donald Trump. I don't think that you could feel about race the way I do and watch that Kushner bastard walk around with that beautiful girl, okay?
Can you talk a little bit about the right adopting the politics or the political style of the left?
We don't have the camaraderie, we don't have the trust level that our rivals do. And that camaraderie and trust is built up through activism, and that is one of the tactics that we're adopting.
We're here, we're gay, we want the KKK. We're here, we're gay, we want the KKK. We're here, we're gay, we want the KKK. Fuck you, fascists! Fuck you, fascists!
So we just saw some rival chants. These are some of the alt-right groups lined up.
Fuck you, fascists! Fuck you, fascists!
They're supposedly here to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee. But they're really here to show that they're more than an internet meme, that they're a big, real presence that can organize in physical space. So the alt-right is very organized. They have a lot of numbers, they have shields, they have protective gear like helmets. We've seen tear gas, water bottles, eggs thrown.
Nothing like pepper spray on set. Legend. Back up on the steps. Back up on the steps. What the fuck?
I should pour it on my face? Yeah.
What just happened?
They maced me.
Who?
I don't know. Communists.
It's the second time in 2 days.
Second time in 2 fucking days.
Hey man, they're afraid of me. You got too big.
Fuck!
Hell can't well.
Hell can't well. Guy, water drink. Water drink. Thank you.
Riot police are coming. We're being told to disperse. Some of the alt-right are being pushed out. It's about a half an hour before the speakers are supposed to start. Some of the alt-right are marching to McIntyre Park. It's the alternate park that they were being pushed to earlier this week.
We're here obeying the law. We're doing everything that we're supposed to do, trying to express opinions. And the criminals are over there getting their way. And that is a foundational problem with our society. And whatever you think of my opinions, that's going to be something that puts you in danger.
Yeah, and that is because this city is run by Jewish communists and criminal niggers. That's exactly what it is.
So you're the true nonviolent protesters.
I'm not even saying we're nonviolent. I'm saying that fucking we didn't aggress. We did not initiate force against anybody. We're not nonviolent. We'll fucking kill these people if we have to.
Tracy and Josh, can you talk about how you approached producing this in the field as it's unfolding? Who was doing what, and what kind of communication were you in?
Yeah, so where to begin? to start, the interview with Chris Cantwell was essentially what got us access to filming with him throughout the remainder of the weekend. We approached it where we filmed an hour-long interview with him. We asked questions, he answered them. At the end of the interview, he sort of thanked us for allowing him to talk. Just sort of the style of journalism that we practice, where we're a bit more anthropological, I think, and a bit more, I guess, sort of in a documentary sense. At least the work that Ellie and I have been working on, and working with Zach and Tracy on this piece. So then, like, moving into the protest on Saturday, it was really a matter of following the events as they unfold, while also staying with our subject, staying with that as our thread. This is the person that, you know, we're following and who's going to lead us through this journey to help us tell a story, just like really the way we would approach any story, in the way, you know, and here being at Columbia, it's kind of funny because I feel like this is something I talk about in my classes, and but it, you know, just finding that focus for the story. And Zach and Orlando, who is the other DP on the piece, were really focused on just putting themselves out there and putting their bodies out there to see some of these clashes that were happening, to gather that visual evidence, while I was really focusing on making sure that you know, we can come back for a quick turnaround to tell this story, and using Ellie as a correspondent to think sort of outside of voiceover, and to actually just to report in the field what's happening, which we don't do very often, and Ellie hasn't done very often, and frankly I haven't done all that often. But our goal producing this story was to sort of have everything sort of in the moment, live as it's happening.
How did you choose where to have her stop and say, what's going on now? It's hard during an unfolding news story to sort of like,
yeah, I mean,
stand here and summarize what just happened.
But it was just sort of like when things were happening, when the protests were heating up and you saw those rival chants going back and forth, it was getting tense, and I wanted to make sure that Ellie described that. We cut it out, but there's a section where she said, American Vanguard is here, and there's a shot of the man who plowed his car through, you know, a street full of people and killed someone. And he was part of that group. There was we pulled her aside when they kicked us out of they kicked the white nationalists out of Emancipation Park, and we had her describe that. When Cantwell was going down the street, we literally were like running full speed to catch up to him, and I was like, all right, Ellie, just start talking to him, like just ask him what happened. And we just started doing an interview right then and there to connect the pictures of what we're seeing to actually what's happening and what's this guy's reaction, so we can sort of see this unfold.
Zach, as a cameraman in the middle of this, how do you sort of guard for your own safety while these people are bashing each other with sticks and getting maced?
It's hard to do that. I got hit with a water bottle straight in the face. I got maced all over me. And I mean, what's funny is actually that, so for those of you who've seen it, the Friday night, the UVA torch lit march, whatever you want to call it, that was my first time filming like a violent sort of ordeal with two groups of people. And what I had kind of going in my head was like, don't get in between them while this is happening, you know. So as soon as you start to get your shot in the middle, like, you know, have an escape route. And because it was a statue and it was a circle around the statue, there wasn't really an escape route. So I backed out really early, and I was like right in their face. If you've seen that part, there's a few close-ups of a woman screaming Black Lives Matter right next to a white nationalist screaming White Lives Matter. You know, I'm right there, and as soon as I start to see these torches flying, I back out. And I looked at the footage later, and I was just like, that's horrible. That like I can't do that. Tomorrow I have to jump in there and get closer and see the contact. And luckily, because Orlando was also rolling, and because the fighting lasted a little bit longer on UVA, like we got the shot, so that was fine. But the next day, to myself, it was like I need to be in there. I need to be as close as I can possibly be, because we need to capture that shot. We need
See the emotion,
to create this environment.
Tracy, where were you while all this is going on?
So the way we did this was we realized as it was unfolding, this is a lot of footage. This is a lot of material. What are we going to do with it? Because we weren't necessarily expecting this. So the way it worked was, Zach stayed the entire time. Zach got there Friday and stayed the whole next week. Josh went back Saturday night or very early Sunday morning, and I arrived very early Sunday morning to relieve him. So he came back. He was there for the torches and for everything on campus and downtown on Saturday. And then I come in so he can go back and we can start figuring out what we're going to do with this. And so I'm basically in touch with Josh about what do you have? What have you seen? What do we need? How do we move this forward and finish this off, and come in and deal with the vigils and the press conference, which happens where Kessler gets chased away, and going to our Chris Cantwell's hideout to sort of figure out how do we tie what we've seen together. So in that way, it was a team effort, and sort of someone has to go back and start scripting and going through footage. Someone needs to finish out.
You basically
what we're
did this
seeing.
in 48 hours, right?
Yeah, I mean, we finished the final Chris Cantwell interview. We didn't get back to our hotel until almost 2:00 in the morning.
On Saturday.
Technically Monday.
Monday. Okay.
And Josh was up all night. We were talking with our executive producer. We were talking with the head of news about what are we going to do with all of this. And I mean, we all pulled all-nighters. We got back at 2 in the morning. We worked until 6 in the morning. We slept for 2 hours, got back up at 8 in the morning, and worked through it airing at 7 p.m. that night. So we sort of had to tap one another in at some point.
Yeah, we had double all-nighters where we were just on chat at ridiculous hours. And they, I mean, to their credit, they were literally watching the footage in the car, driving 2.5 hours back from North Carolina to Virginia, pulling selects from the Sunday footage, while I was working with an editor in the Vice offices from about noon on Sunday through about 9 in the morning on Monday, on the footage we had gathered Friday and Saturday.
Where we were editing, the last act of the piece in the field pretty much as it had just happened.
Wow.
For us, we did our interview before Charlottesville. It's one of those things that we were trying to do a story about, white supremacists, and then Charlottesville happened. Our interview happened, I believe it was July 24th. July 24th, and Charlottesville was the first week in August.
First week in August,
The
yeah.
first week
August
in
8th.
August.
Isn't it?
So the first week in August, by that point, we were preparing a special, right? So I guess it was very timely. And then we incorporated what had happened in Charlottesville, because the White Knights, these were also part of, the groups that were protesting in Charlottesville.
It's interesting in one way, because Ellie had been covering this beat for 2 years. You're coming to it not really new, but
Relatively new.
I mean, it's one of the reasons why I wanted you here. I mean, Latinos don't often enter this conversation between blacks and whites in the United States. And so how much did you have to know? How much did you study before you walked into that room? How much did you feel like you had to sort of understand the history?
We had to do our homework. We had a whole discussion, Ilya and I, and a couple of other people in the newsroom, even about the N-word. In Spanish, the N-word is it's not offensive, In fact, Ilya is better to talk about that.
Yeah, some of my friends, they just call me negra, which is, black, basically. But when they use the N-word, is trying to use your race to insult you. That is totally different. So for me, it's okay if they call me black or negra, right?
if
But
her, again,
the
her
N
Spanish,
word,
right.
In Spanish, the N word, negra.
Just-
Right.
Yeah, black woman, basically,
Ah,
they're
yeah,
calling you
and
black
proud.
woman, which is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for us, it's even, we had a whole discussion about should we beep, when they call her nigger, in the interview. Because we were, okay, if we don't put it in Spanish, or should we explain to their audience even, how derogatory, how totally offensive and what it means. So it was I think for our audience, it was the first time that they were exposed to the hatred that is currently gripping the country, the United States, in 2017. Most of them have called. A lot of them have called the station. They go up to Ilya. They thank her. They couldn't believe that this is what's happening. They were certainly shocked.
Yeah, let's take a look at that section of the. I was sort of. It was hard to watch. It was interesting. Both of these films were really striking, I think, for different reasons. I think Univision was sort of personally eviscerating for me, and the Vice piece was just plain scary.
The
You know?
memorabilia inside the house was chilling.
Yeah.
It was, I've never seen anything like that. This is what these people live there. This is their home.
Trabajo como periodistas. Las entrevistas no siempre son cordiales, especialmente cuando tenemos que hacer preguntas difíciles. En más de 20 años de carrera he tenido que enfrentar personajes complejos y controversiales, pero nunca, nunca en vez de respuestas había recibido insultos y amenazas.
How is the America you want? How do you picture the America?
In Revelations 11:9, we will get America.
According to Christopher and Amanda Barker, loyal white knights of the Ku Klux Klan, in the Bible, God prophesies the victory over all races that are not white and over races that are mixed.
Isaiah 5:6-8. He says, I fear the children that scream with strange flesh. He says, I will chase them away. They will burn in their eternal fire. Now, God loves everybody according to y'all. But God also said that one verse, look it up, it's something he didn't create.
Right.
That's a damnation, abomination.
America is not going to get better. We have all these Arabs coming up here, which is killing our people too. I mean, they're killing people all over the world, but
Do
I
you
mean,
think America is better today because of the immigrants, because of the
No.
work of the black people,
America, our
because of
economy,
the
we got
Jewish people,
10.6
because of
million,
diversity?
10.6 million people are unemployed right now. We ain't had this number since the Great Depression.
According to government reports, in July, the unemployment rate fell to 4.3%, or about 7 million people, its lowest level since 2007. Why do you think they are unemployed?
because we keep taking people in here, and then what is the jobs for the people that do live here? You think it's fair that you come over here, but then you put other people out of work that actually been here way before you got here?
Ellos no quieren a los inmigrantes, no los quieren en su tierra, la que ellos llaman su tierra, su país. No reconocen que nosotros los inmigrantes hacemos una parte importante y hemos hecho durante décadas un aporte importante a la economía de los Estados Unidos, y lo que hace no solamente a Estados Unidos una economía fuerte, sino un país diverso y un país rico en cultura, en religiones, un país donde se puede vivir democráticamente y abiertamente.
Why don't you go back? If you love your country, why you come over here chasing dollars? Here all y'all people say, scream, we do the jobs nobody wants to do. There's white people, black people want these jobs now. We have nothing here in America. Y'all keep flooding it. But like God said, we will chase you out of here, and it's going to be a thorn.
Are you going to chase me out of here?
No, we're going to burn you out.
Are you
Like
going to
God
burn
said.
me out? How are you going to do
Yahweh.
it? How are you going to do
Yahweh's
with 11 million immigrants?
Don't matter. Hey, we
What are
killed
you gonna
6
do?
million Jews the last time.
How are
11 million is
you're telling me
nothing.
that you're going to burn me?
Yeah.
That's
He's
violence.
not saying
No, that ain't
physically.
no, physically
to
we
you.
are.
Physically,
saying
you
like
are.
directly
That's a threat.
from them.
That's
You're
a
sitting on
threat.
my property now.
And I do understand that I'm probably the first black person immigrant here in your property.
To me, you're a nigger. That's it.
Watch him now.
That's it.
I find
I
that
ain't watching my mouth.
I find that offensive, and I don't think you
give
need
a
to go
flying
that,
fuck, you can call me
because
cracker.
my skin color doesn't define me. Y en ese momento realmente sentí mucho miedo por mi seguridad y por la seguridad de todo mi equipo. Pero bueno, es ahí cuando te tienes que armar de valor y seguir con el objetivo, pensar en por qué estás ahí.
You say you were afraid, but you also looked a bit angry, Ilya. How do you maintain?
Of course I was upset. I was upset.
How do you maintain neutrality and keep an interview going in such a way that you keep getting answers when you're being called names like that?
First of all, because that was our job, and our job needed to be done. And second, because I know I am not what he's saying there. He's insulting what I represent. He's insulting my race. He's insulting black people. He's insulting immigrants, Jewish people. So he's insulting all of us. If I go to that level, if I try to get in an argument with him or just stand up, I couldn't do my job. We couldn't have the story done.
And to be honest, the cameramen that were shooting, there was two, the Anglo and the Mexican, they wanted to stop the interview. A couple of times here they came to me and said, maybe we should stop. We're worried, especially at the top. I'm going to burn you out of here.
There's a moment where he walks off.
And
you called him back.
Yeah,
and
he
sits again.
was just upset. And at one point, the discussion or the argument was so tight that it was no point for me to try to show him statistics, anything was going to change his mind.
Right. Nothing would change his mind. Josh, so working with Ellie, do you think it makes a difference? Do you think a black reporter could have gone in and done the story that you did in Charlottesville?
I get asked that a lot, and people are like, were you afraid in the van, like with this neo-Nazi saying all these things about Jews? And inside the van, I was with our other director of photography, Orlando, who's Filipino. He looks like very brown. And, it's difficult. It's difficult to really say for sure. But I could say in those moments, we're doing our jobs and they're kind of doing theirs. Like there's a certain amount of...
the cameraman or they the
subjects that we're documenting, they wanted the media attention. There was a reason why they let us in that van, and there was a reason why they actually almost kicked us out, and we weren't sure how they were going to kick us out when they were threatening to.
Oh, in the van when they said,
But I think in terms of the way we work, we had a fairly diverse crew on this one. And, Tracy, I'll let you talk to the fact about, you were in a hotel room with how many guns?
A lot of guns. He had 8 or 9 different guns and knives and batons. And I mean, at the end of the day, Ellie had 2 producers, a Jewish man and a black woman, who both ended up in interesting situations with a group of people who think that we're not human. And I think that there's a lot of trust that has to happen in that situation. I think that, Ellie has been forming these relationships for a long time, and we have to trust her relationship with these people, and she needs to be able to trust us as producers that if something goes wrong, we know how to get out of the situation. And so I think it really is a team effort. And to be frank, I think no matter who you are, if you're in a van full of neo-Nazis, you're going to be afraid. If you're in a hotel room with a emotionally unstable person and a lot of weapons, you're going to be afraid. And so I think that the only thing you can think about is, I'm a reporter right now, and I need to wear that hat the best I can.
Just get the
Go ahead. Happened to me too, because for us,
can you speak into the mic just a little bit?
For us, was a very tense and volatile situation. But as a reporter, I trust Maria. As a producer, she's very good negotiating. So I knew that if the situation was gonna escalate, she was gonna get me out of there. She is very good convincing you not to do bad things and to do good things, and vice versa. So
I was worried. I was quite concerned. There was no cell service where they live. We didn't have the we didn't have the address.
We didn't know where we're going.
We didn't know where we were going. This is in their property. This is their backyard. There's 6 acres. They wanted to do it in the woods. That was the only condition they had. Everything they did was to try to intimidate us. He had just gotten off a stabbing that happened in his house.
6
in
months
December.
December.
Yeah, in December 2016, he had 33 counts of, he had an extensive criminal record. So I was concerned. I have had a lot of experience dealing with cartels and in difficult interviews. And what was most striking for me, or most chilling, or there was no control here. The only thing I could do here is just try, that we wrap this up as amicable as possible, and that I get my crew out of there, the fastest way possible. But I was concerned because we were basically following them down these narrow roads. Again, there was no cell service. They refused to give us the interview. As you can tell, it was a very deserted. It's a little town called Yanceyville, which is in the border of Virginia and North Carolina. And this farmhouse where they live is it was 30 minutes from the Bojangle. That was the meeting place. And we had nothing.
Did you have an escape route? Had you thought
the
through,
escape
what
route
happens?
was, and we had 2 cars.
Okay.
It was Ilya's car with the Anglo cameraman, my car with the Mexican cameraman, which, in full disclosure, the Mexican cameraman is my husband. So, that was another point for me, that at the beginning they were insulting my husband. So I had a black reporter sitting outside in a car, my husband who's trying to be in control because he's a cameraman, the Anglo cameraman speaking in Spanish, which was taking them over the edge because they looked at him like if he was a total traitor.
And he wore Scott, the Anglo cameraman, wore a T-shirt with a picture of Native Indians saying homeland.
Yeah. So it was a diverse group, but honestly, to tell you, it was probably among the most bizarre things I've ever done as a producer, and I was in El Chapo's mother's house in Sinaloa. So when I tell you this, that was. And the way they try to intimidate you, pointing at the statues, hey, look at there. Oh, look, we're very proud of this. Their little KKK.
No, they even dared to give me
they gave her,
tattoo
like a souvenir.
a souvenir.
I wonder to what degree you feel, even though he called you names, there had built up a level of trust. Tracy and Josh talked about the trust and their desire to get the story out, and I wonder to what degree that even though they were insulting you, there was some level of trust that you had built up with them, and that even Ilya, that you were able to connect with them while doing the interview. I see you laughing, Tracy, so I'm coming back to you.
I don't know if there was a level of trust, but at the end of the day, these people get off in getting their message across, and they use the media. That's the reality. They get followers or whatever we want to call the people. If you guys would have heard the hotline, they are getting about 200 to 300 people a day calling them, wanting to join the Klan. They played some of those calls for us. The calls are chilling. I want to join the Klan because I want to kill some people. I want to join the Klan because I'm sick of what's happening in this country. And every call that we heard was worse than the one before.
But one of the things you did with your broadcast was you invited your listeners on Twitter, and I think it was on Twitter. I mean, my Spanish is awful, but I tried to read some of them. So you were inviting your audience to give their experiences even as the film was unfolding.
Correct.
And what kind of response, well, can you talk about some of those responses? And then I'd like the Vice folks to tell me what kind of responses they've gotten.
Well,
So I
some
pose-
people were asking me, why you? If you know you're black, why do you go to
Why would you
confront him?
go?
Why
Yeah.
would you go? Why not?
I think a lot of our
I mean,
students
like,
had that question.
My skin color, my origin, my religion, my gender cannot limit my job as a journalist. Why not?
And why should we? But why should we? Why glorify these people anymore?
It's not glorifying, but our audience needed to know these groups are growing and they exist. And I actually have some numbers here. More than 5,000 incidents with victims, 7,000 victims, 59.2% targeted because of ethnicity and race.
From the Klan, of Klan violence? Hate violence.
From hate groups.
Hate groups.
And the
There's
funny
hate
part
crime.
is that they say that they're not a hate group.
They are
They're
a
not.
religious group.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tracy and Josh?
In terms of response, I mean, I think There were a lot of things we couldn't predict in terms of the response to our piece. I think, one, we got it out so quickly that we were the first people to sort of have evidence of what happened. Video, you could hear the audio of "Jews will not replace us." People did not think that, even if they'd heard something like that, they're like, people don't really think that. Well, we have the proof. And then a couple of days later, when Trump comes out and says there are very fine people on both sides, it's really hard to argue with the video that we put out. And so I think he became sort of held accountable for his words and his actions through our work. And next thing you know, it's, being played on repeat on CNN and MSNBC and all of these other places. And so I think the response we got was, I maybe heard about this or thought that there might be some people like this, but I didn't think they actually thought it. And seeing it is chilling, and it's a reality, and it brought it home for people. And I thought that was really important, especially in light of Trump's, the way Trump sort of handled his response to Charlottesville.
Yeah, we never thought we could make the film that we made, simply because we were airing over 48 hours after the event happened.
Yeah.
There was other press there, but it didn't really get the, you saw pictures, you might have seen some quotes in newspapers, but I mean, I think it just speaks to the power of video in an event like this, and just sort of in the space that we live in, where seeing all of that come together, can really open up people's eyes in the way that sometimes writing or photography doesn't necessarily do.
I would also say that the response nationally was one thing, but the response locally on the ground, I mean, we were there for the whole next week, and Ellie couldn't walk a few steps without, someone stopping her, but people were just, very thankful, and I think mostly thankful that we really dedicated a whole show to this. It wasn't just, oh, this is what happened in Charlottesville, Trump said this, on to the next thing. It was like, this is how it felt. Yeah. This is what this side saw, this is what that side saw. And I think, that's what really struck me, at least from the community, was just like, seeing how this has weighed on them, seeing how it affected them, and then them sort of seeing that through our piece, I think was really
They kept
heavy.
saying, like, they kept thanking Ellie for capturing what happened in their town. Mm-hmm. They were like, we don't know how to articulate it, but your piece did. Mm-hmm. And I think that meant a lot to people actually there.
There's this really striking moment. It's the Vice clip number 3, Thor, that I just wanted to play. Ellie did do an amazing job of sort of both of you did amazing jobs in the face of like a torrent of hatred that day. And yeah, how do you do that? Yeah, just pause it a second, because I just had this thought in my head. How do you? You don't.
I don't know.
It's back on. It's okay.
I don't know how do I think it's my personality, a part of being in control and being capable of facing those situations too.
Right.
At the end of the interview, she was very sad.
I actually,
And I asked her, I wanted to get her thoughts. I said, what's wrong? Tell me what you think. And this is what she said.
I call my husband and I call my daughter. I have a daughter. My husband is Korean, so she's a mix. And she's very proud of being Black and Asian. And I called them both, and I just cried. It's just so, it makes me so sad to see the world that she's going to face, or that she's going to grow in.
Yeah. With that, this scene with Chris Cantrell, and this is the moment, Tracy, I think, where you said you were in the hotel room, where he's showing you all the guns.
Yeah.
You're so brave.
All right, so I came pretty well prepared for this thing today. Kel-Tec P3AT, 380 ACP, Glock 19, 9mm, Ruger LC9, also 9mm, and there's a knife. Well, I actually have another AK in that bag over there. You get lose track of your fucking guns, huh? I'd say it was worth it. We knew that we were going to meet a lot of resistance. The fact that nobody on our side died, I'd go ahead and call that points for us. The fact that none of our people killed anybody unjustly, I think, is a plus for us. And I think that we showed our rivals that we won't be cowed.
But the car that struck a protester, that's unprovoked.
That's not true, and you know that it's not true. You've seen the video. So
I've seen a video.
Yeah.
I don't know much about it.
I understand that
Can you describe what the video appears to show?
Okay. So the video appears to show someone striking that vehicle when these animals attacked him again, and he saw no way to get away from them except to hit the gas. And sadly, because our rivals are a bunch of stupid animals who don't pay attention, they couldn't just get out of the way of his car, and some people got hurt, and that's unfortunate.
So you think it was justified?
I think it was more than justified. I can't believe the amount of restraint that our people showed out there, I think was astounding.
What do you think this means for the next alt-right protest?
I say it's going to be really tough to top, but we're up to the challenge.
Wait, why?
Why?
Tough to top? I mean, someone died.
I think that a lot more people are going to die before we're done here, frankly.
Why?
Why? Because people die every day, right? I mean,
Not like of a heart attack, I mean violent death.
Well, people die violent deaths all the time, right? Like, this is part of the reason that we want an ethno state, right? So, like, the blacks are killing each other in staggering numbers from coast to coast. We don't really want to have a part of that anymore. And so, the fact that they resist us when we say, hey, we want a homeland, is not shocking to me, all right? These people want violence, and the right is just meeting market demand.
So, Tracy, did you know he had all those guns before you were?
No.
So
we did not.
So he's like showing you gun after gun after gun, and you're there with your cameraman, and what's going on inside your head?
Yeah, so it was just me, Zach, and Ellie in that room. And he said before we started the interview, hey, I want to show you my gun. And I thought it was one, because there was one propped up by the window. And I'm like, okay, I see his gun, like... All right, he can show us after this interview. And I'm kind of happy we made that decision now, because the interview might have been a little bit more uncomfortable had we known. But it was definitely a scary moment. I knew, we sort of had an idea of who this guy was at this point, right? Josh and Elliot spent 2 days with him, and same with Zach. And so before we went into the hotel room, I sent a text message to our senior producer with our location saying, if we're not out in a certain amount of time, call us. Yeah. This is where we are. But we went in, and I think it was that sort of trust that kicked in that I mentioned earlier, where, you know, I was nervous about him. I was the new producer on the shoot. He had never met me before. So it was going through my mind, okay, well, what is his reaction to me going to be? So we made the decision to send Ellie in first to talk to him and kind of loosen him up. And Zach and I came up with gear afterwards. And when she introduced me, you could tell he was a little taken aback, but he shook his hand out to me. And so I'm like, okay, this is gonna be okay for right now, because he wants his message out. And so we just wanted to let him speak. And I think Ellie pushes back on him, as you see, but she does it in a way that's sort of like, explain what you see. She doesn't try to say, no, that's not true, let me argue with facts and numbers and all these other things, because sort of logic doesn't apply in this situation. So the way in which she pushes back is sort of, okay, explain it to me. Do you really think that? And he does, and I think that's kind of a safe way to do it. But and he did get upset with us, and he started loading his guns and pointing them around and making sure we knew that he knew how to use them. And at that point, we said, let's leave.
And then, of course, a couple of days later, he's like a punk on YouTube crying because the police are going to come arrest him.
So we made him cry in that room. We didn't air it.
He did.
Yeah. So he was.
What was he crying about?
He was crying. Ellie and I were sitting on the bed talking to him, and And he started saying that he didn't want to be racist, that he didn't want to be this way, that this wasn't an easy life for him. You know, it's hard to get a job. It's, you know, it's whatever. And you could just sort of see this emotion swelling, and you could feel it in the room. And so I just asked him if it made him sad. And he said, yeah. And he started crying and talking about how if he doesn't do it, who else will, kind of thing. And, you know, Ellie kept asking more questions, and he got very emotional. But I think we did make an editorial decision of what is this piece about, and does this belong in it? And we thought no, but then he gave it to us anyway a few days later.
Maria and Ilya, you confronted a little more forcefully, and then you went back and did background work on Chris Barker. What did you find? Did you do that before? Did you know all those things about him?
We knew before.
He was on probation at that time.
Yeah.
He was on
So
probation
you go
for
into
stabbing.
a secluded area without cell phone service, and nobody knows where you are, with a known felon who has just stabbed somebody. And you think because there's like 6 of you and only
There was 4 of us.
there was 4 of you, and he's got like 10 buddies there.
And I don't think you can see it from the video. Most people wouldn't know. When they do the ritual, the ceremony at the end, about 3 of them were minor children.
They're kids.
They're children.
14 and 16.
They're already, yeah. I have a 17-year-old. That for me was shocking.
Well, they have to learn it somewhere.
They allow them when they are kids to play with blacks and Jews, but they grow up knowing that is bad.
Well,
blacks
it's
are
pretty much the
inhuman,
way it worked in slavery.
that is
You were
bad,
allowed
so
to have a
they
black playmate
separate
until
them
you
from
became
black
like 10 or
people.
11, yeah. Yeah, it was crazy. So you did the background work, but you didn't confront him with it during the interview.
No.
You waited until
No,
after.
exactly.
No, we didn't talk about
What
it.
was the explain the editorial thinking there?
Because we were there knowing who these people were. For us, is about their hatred, about, you know, what their speech, about what they're about. We wanted our audience to know that these groups exist, like I said before, and that the hatred is out there, and that they're growing in numbers. So, I mean, he had 33 counts. He's had been charged with 33 different things: robbery. He's been in jail, DUIs, battery. The latest was a stabbing, which, you know, the charges were dropped because the stabbing, which happened again in his house, that same place where we did the interview. And the first thing he said to me when I walked in, he goes, "I thought you weren't going to show up because, you know, if you knew about the stabbing, most people, you know, then decide not to come to our home." I said, "No, that's not going to deter me." But they do this, like they say, they do these things to try to intimidate you right off the bat. So, and editorially I mean, it's important to know that he had 33 counts. It's important, but for us, it was much more than that. We needed to expose our audience, to show our audience what these white supremacist groups were all about.
And for me, he didn't shake my hand at the beginning.
No,
he looked at me like really bad and upset because I was in his property. At the end, I extended my hand. I offered my hand to the wife, and she did. And he wanted, but at the end, he did.
When they actually saw her when she got off the car, when she got off the car and walked into already, we had the interview set up and get in the woods, he said to me, "You brought a N-word into my property?" And I said to him, "I told you, my correspondent is a Hispanic woman of color." And he said, "I just thought she was like you people, just darker."
Well, she is. Oh, boy. There's an element of this. I mean, you all are saying, well, they want to get their message out, and they're sort of using the media for that. And there's a part of me that sort of has a yuck factor here. I mean, yuck factor, I guess. Do you worry that maybe some people, like the next Dylan Roof, might see this and think, "Oh, I think that's cool"? Even though we now know that Chris Cantrell, like 2 days later, he's very scary in your documentary, but then he turns around and he's crying 2 days later because he's afraid he's going to be arrested. You know, and then
Yeah,
himself.
He's
Yeah,
like,
I
right,
worry that
And Chris Barker is like, a convicted felon who's really quoting almost every Bible verse that he quotes is wrong. Yeah, there's like 2 that he actually got right. I just wonder, are we blowing up these sort of self-appointed persons to the degree that we're sort of helping them sell their message in a negative way? Why do these stories now?
Yeah, I mean, I worry that Chris Cantwell became Chris Cantwell not because of Vice, but the reason he was speaking at that event was because he made a name for himself with the Radical Agenda podcast, which is, I mean, if you listen to it, is a hate-filled podcast. And there's spaces, online spaces, there's YouTubers, they're on 4chan, and they exist without the media, and they will continue to exist without the media, and they'll continue to grow without the media. And I think our role in this is bring this to more mainstream attention because it's there. And my personal takeaway from covering this is I'm afraid. It's very scary to know that this activity, these people who have so much hate and who want to get angry at blacks and Jews and Hispanics and whoever else, are now willing to come out and show their faces, but they existed in online communities, and we're just now starting to expose that in mainstream reporting, and that's what scares me, and that's. I get asked about signal boosting a lot and amplifying their message, but I think they're doing a good enough job
Doing it themselves anyway.
Yeah.
Ilya and Maria, one of the things I found interesting about your story was you looked at the religious fundamentalist aspect of this, and the hatred for immigrants, but you really looked at the quotation of the text. Can you talk about the fundamentalist religious aspect
It is when
of the Klan?
he recalls a letter that Pilatus.
There's a letter that supposedly
supposed to be in the Library of the Congress.
Right.
And
Yes.
that doesn't exist.
I didn't
No,
quote.
it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
exist.
didn't use.
No,
I didn't
it
pull
was-
that section, but yeah. There's
He said-
supposed to be a letter from Pontius Pilate that is in the Library of Congress. This is already bogus, right? That talks about
Sitting at a table.
Right.
With,
I don't even remember. I mean, they
was like so
distort
you just make stuff up.
all the church versus they distort everything to fit their beliefs.
But then you interviewed a seminary,
Yeah.
a priest who
Right.
actually deconstructs this.
Because again, for our audience, all this is new. Okay, so if we're trying to give them what they said, worrying also that that they might buy this, like you said, we wanted to make sure that we had people in there who were experts in their field that were going to dispute the garbage that they were saying. Maybe 100 people knew they were garbage, but that one person that didn't know should know and should hear it from an expert. So that's why when we did our special in documentary style, we wanted to make sure we had experts in there disputing some of their points.
I've been asking questions that were crowdsourced from the students, but there is a mic up here. I don't know if there's one over here as well. If you have any questions, come up and there's one right away. Okay.
Hello. My question is for Maria and Ilya. Did you get any reactions, comments, feedback, threats, anything from the KKK after airing your documentary?
I got a call from them. I got a call from Chris Barker. He said that the only thing he was worried about that we not make him look like a coward, because at the point that he gets up from the interview, that we better not edit it out because he wanted to smoke a cigarette. Yeah, he was upset, but he was gonna come back, and that was his concern. That that we not make him look like a coward. That he was stomping away or from a black woman. That he couldn't hold his own. That was the comment that I got from him after he saw the interview.
Well, any others back here? I can't tell if there's a mic. No? Okay. One of my is there one in the back? Russia?
Yeah.
Okay. Come up to the mic so everybody can hear, because some of us can't hear because we're older.
Hi. So this is directed more to Vice. You talked a lot about that, is it Elle or Ely?
Ellie.
That Ellie.
Ellie.
That she built this rapport and she had trust and this relationship. Have you gotten a response from them since airing the film as to whether they're happy with the way that their message was broadcasted or whether she'll be able to maintain this relationship now?
Cantwell liked the film.
Yeah, he liked it. And she was checking 4chan after to see what they were saying. Because, at the end of the day, these are sources, and you have to cultivate sources so that you can continue telling stories. And she was checking 4chan, and even if they didn't like her, even if they didn't agree with her, they were saying that she listened and that she let him speak. And so I think that was really important for the relationship.
There was one moment where he's saying, he's going on, actually I find that both of them, sorry, news alerts, North Korea again. He's making a comment that both of your interviewees did this, cited the number of black kids that kill other black kids as a reason for why there should be an ethno-state, and in one instance, that black kids get killed by the cops because they're acting either in ways they shouldn't be acting or acting like criminals. And sort of both of you let them, in both cases, they sort of skate on that statement. Do you worry at all that people who don't know this history, don't know the story of Black Lives Matter, might take the wrong, get the wrong impression?
I think he talks not just, like in our interview at least, he talks not just about black people. He says, he calls all of the protesters, black, white, and otherwise, animals.
Yeah.
Communists and animals. And I think the way in which Ellie pushed back on that was in questioning him about, okay, well, someone died. Like, how do you justify that? Was, I think, her way of pushing back on that. And I think, I don't know if it's because I was in the room or what. I mean, he didn't hide his feelings about black people, but he didn't specifically target black people. So I wasn't really worried about that message. I think it was broader for him.
Right. Yeah.
I think for us, that's a great question. For us, it's more than black versus white. Remember, we're already a minority, okay? Our audience are Hispanics. So for us is, again, introducing them to people who totally hate their existence. It's more than, Black Lives Matter. It's, they hate the fact that we're immigrants. They hate the fact that, we're a different skin color. We had in there, three of us were Hispanic, but we all look very different. I'm Cuban, Elia's Colombian, the Mexican cameraman, which is my husband, we had different shades, So for us, it was more than that. Maybe we'll get there about exposing, but for them, it's relatively new. And in fact, everywhere we go and everywhere Elia goes, they thank her. They thank her for making them aware that this is out there, that these people exist. For them, it's like a shock and awe factor.
Mm-hmm. Question.
Thank you for coming. I've enjoyed the discussion. My question is...
Can you speak in the mic, please?
Do you guys see yourself doing more stories like this, covering protests?
I do. I think it's definitely something that we have to do. This is not the end of this story.
And it's something, we've been covering alt-right for a while now. A lot of it through, I was talking about earlier, things happening with the Daily Stormer, online harassment going online, and that's sort of the approach that we're taking at Vice. But it remains to be seen what happens next. We covered Berkeley, a few months ago, and
yeah, for me, I guess I've spent a good amount of my time post-Columbia covering protests. I covered Ferguson. I was in Baltimore, protesting here in New York. So this wasn't my first time doing that, and I think the Vice style is very verite. It's very immersive. It's very putting people into the sights and sounds of a place. So I think when things happen, we'll continue to cover stories that way.
My question was the editorial decision that you made to cut out the crying racist. How did you feel? What was that decision based on? And how do you think it would have changed the tone of your package if you had included it?
So this was, Zach and I talked about this with Ellie. I mean, because that was the section that was sort of edited in the field. So we weren't necessarily there with our seniors and our executive producer and things like that. I think that what it came down to was our piece was not a profile of Chris Cantwell as a human and all of his emotional human flaws. It was about this thing that had happened and this group and what they stand for. We weren't trying to psychoanalyze him. And so a big part of the decision was if this was a profile about him and all the things that he feels and conflicting emotions, then we probably would have put it in. But that wasn't the point of the piece. And then also, I think there was this idea of not wanting to sympathize too much with him because he starts crying of, if I'm not going to save the white race, then who is? And I just didn't.
It's like
I
an
think
oh
we didn't
please
think
moment.
that was. It was. It didn't feel appropriate to, especially for the end of the piece.
Yeah, and from a practical matter, I mean, we were on the phone late at night. It was Sunday night after the interview happened, and I was working with a video editor. I had written up a pretty massive script. It was probably like 8 pages at that point.
It was more.
Maybe more. And I was feeding that back to the team in the field, like immediately. And you had read that, and you had said, "Okay, I just read your script. We made Cantwell cry, but I don't think we can use it because I see where this piece is going. This is not a profile of Cantwell. This is about the event." And
we walked out of that room. I mean, there was a point where Cantwell even started kind of yelling at Ellie about Ellie and Josh getting into the van with them and how that was inappropriate. And we walked away from the interview with a lot of adrenaline, and there were a lot of things we were like, oh, we got to get that in. We got to get the crying in. We got to get the yelling in. We got to get him loading his guns in. And I think we had to step back for a moment and talk as a team about what is this piece about. And that's why I made those.
I want to
feel
get
like
it.
it's
There's
really
a lot of
easy to
people at
get-
the mic, so I want.
Just really quickly, I feel like it's really easy to get caught up in those moments, and
Yeah.
I know I left that scene just thinking, oh my God, like that is gold right there. But I think they ultimately made the right decision because it's a much bigger story than just Cantwell.
Yeah, the second part of the question was, how do you think it would have affected the tone of your package and the way that it would have impacted the viewers in terms of the fear that these people actually inspire in all of us?
I think they answered that by saying it wasn't a film about him. It's a film about that event.
And
I
frankly,
just want
I
to give
feel like-
everybody a chance to ask the question. It's not the. You
well,
can
then
come up and
he did that
pursue it some
himself
more
a day
after we're
later.
done.
So
Okay,
didn't
on this
need
side.
it.
This is a question for Ilya, actually. As a journalist of color, how do you balance the traditional expectations of journalistic objectivity and neutrality with being
Sorry,
a
you're gonna
person?
have to speak up, hon. We can't
oh,
hear.
No problem, no problem. So this is for Ilya. As a journalist of color, how do you balance the traditional expectations of journalistic objectivity and neutrality with hate attacks on your own community and your personal feelings towards that?
How do I balance that?
Your feelings.
Well, it's a part of my job. I was just doing a job. I am not sitting there as Ilya Calderon. I am as a journalist sitting there and doing a job. That's the way you balance, because I didn't take it personal.
Okay, we hear.
Hi, I'm Juan. This question is for the team from Univision. Following Charlottesville, you spoke about wanting to enlighten and unpack this for Latino audiences who may not know about this pool of hatred that's growing across the country. After the Charlottesville attack, I retweeted actually one of your tweets that you said that this is a time for unity in Spanish. I got some, essentially some hate tweets from white Latinos. I then tweeted subsequently about how we, as a black Latino myself, I'm Afro-Cuban, we have to stand with black people from as Latinos in America, as Black Americans who are also being targeted. That it's our problem. So I started to get a lot of hate from a group of like white Latino supremacists. I was wondering what maybe you have learned about hatred within and racism within the Latino community post this documentary.
That's a great question. That's in researching this, we came across that you're absolutely right, that there were even white Latinos who are part of, if you can believe this, some of these white supremacy groups. It's part of what we plan to do in the future. That's exactly where we're at right now. For us, it was mind-boggling that we would be attacking each other, and that we tried to differentiate, all of us being Latinos. Oh, but you're black, but I'm white, and you're mulatto. And that there's a very palpable racism even within our community because of our skin color, our different skin colors. So we're going to certainly try. I don't know if they will give us interviews. We're trying to do that right now. Try to sit down with some of those white Latino supremacists that are currently out there. That for us, that was shocking to know.
Gracias.
A colorism that seems came here and got twisted.
That's something that came about because of the special.
Yeah. Yes.
There was a moment in the Charlottesville documentary just after the car when Ellie was doing her broadcast and she looked very emotional.
Yeah, I was going to show that and then ran out of time. Yeah.
I was just wondering how you approached that moment, because obviously everything changed after that point, and how you approached it as a crew.
She seemed so hopeless in that one moment where she's describing it.
Yeah. I mean, we all were in a state of shock, and my immediate, we were all very close to that intersection, within half a block at the maximum, and we had just crossed that intersection. So, I mean, you can only imagine the thoughts that were racing through everyone's minds. And Ellie would later say to me, we just crossed that intersection, and there were people around us reacting just very emotionally, and I could see on Ellie's face we had to capture that emotion somehow, and I just literally just go in front of the camera, go. And I think Zach, you were Zach, you were there, and you could probably help describe it too, because I'm kind of at a blur with it. But I knew we wanted her in front of the camera at that point to just describe what happened, almost as if a podcast, just describing what you're seeing, so that we could capture that feel around what was happening.
Yeah, I do remember your direction of just saying, describe what just happened. That's it. And I was crying, it was the most traumatic thing I'd ever seen in my life, and but I think, again, it sort of goes back to what you were saying earlier, just about you're here to do a job. One thing we were talking about in the car on the way over here was what sort of compounded the trauma of seeing someone dying in front of you, seeing this terrorist attack occur in front of you, was that people start screaming at us, people with cameras, because we're filming, and that's totally natural. I have nothing against that, but I'm gonna stand my ground, and I'm gonna say I need to get this shot, and that was just very, very difficult to deal with. And I think in that moment, again, it's just you sort of back away. It's totally a gray space for me. I don't even feel like I remember what was going on, but I remember that comment, and I remember standing there exactly where we were. We revisited that spot a number of times the rest of the week, and you just sort of do your job and maybe take a breath afterwards, a quick hug or something, and then continue.
Yes. This question is for everyone on the panel. With with this increased coverage of protests, or covering extremely violent events is no longer a foreign correspondence job. It seems like it's a more regular occurrence in the United States or, in places much closer to home. I would really love to hear each of your company's policies regarding resources for both training before going. You talked about whether it be gas masks or milk for macing and things like that, but also mental health resources, whether it be policies or access regarding therapy or sort of training, or even how you debrief immediately after finishing something.
How do you
like
handle
this.
it afterwards? Yeah.
I can probably speak to this.
Maria is the vice president of news
Right,
at
I'm vice
Univision,
president
so-
of News Gathering, so all my national and international reporters obviously report to me. It depends on the story. For instance, I remember after Connecticut, after New Haven, the reporters that covered the tragedy of losing 20 children in a mass shooting, some of those reporters needed therapy. It depends on what we're covering. If you're going to cover, for instance, Charlottesville, we had given our crew that covered Charlottesville, gas masks. We tried to have them, have them have an escape route. It depends, I guess, on the circumstance. When we cover stories in Latin America, when we do a lot of, like I said before, the cartels, we try to have armed guards when needed. It just depends on where we're at and what the story is. And absolutely, afterwards, some of them need everything from therapy to time off to decompressing to kind of scale back. Ilia went in there doing her job, right? That's what she wanted to do the story. She volunteered to do the story, but she also became part of the story. That's, she remained objective. But if you see through in her face, I don't think anybody here could sit there and have somebody insult you and not show some sort of, emotion. She did it wonderfully. And at the end, in our newsroom, some of us had this conversation. They asked me, should we have sent her in there? Should she have done because she's black? Maybe she shouldn't have gone. I absolutely think that she should have gone. I think that because she's a black Hispanic, she exposed something that our audience hadn't seen before, and I think it worked out for us and it worked out for our audience, and ultimately we answered to our audience. But to answer your question, it absolutely depends on the type of story that we're doing. And yeah, sometimes we need therapy, and we need to time off, and we need a lot of tools. And right now I have crews in covering Harvey. I have people sleeping in cars. For instance, I had a crew yesterday that was stranded, right? They were by a river. It started overflowing, and they were calling us, what do? We had to have an escape route. We had to have people close by to try to get them out of there. So it absolutely depends on the story. And yeah, we always have to have a plan B. We did not have a plan B when we went into Yanceyville, but it's looking back on it, I don't know. Should we have done it? It worked out. We got out of there, but wasn't probably one of the smartest things I've ever done. But at the end of the day, we had to get our story, and Ilia got her story.
Does Vice have a program train
there-
you to deal with these kinds of situations in the aftermath?
Yeah, there's hostile environment training. There's risk assessments for stories like these. We had a risk assessment. It came up sort of somewhere in the middle, which meant that we had to go out with jackets and masks and helmets. And for situations like with Tracy, checking in with your senior producer, making sure they know exactly where you are, what time they're getting a phone call. And then in the aftermath, they provide mental health services. So all of that, all of that exists. But it really does. This type of reporting does take its toll on you, and it's something we've kind of all been talking about in the last couple of weeks.
Right. And our executive producer for our show, as well as our head of news, are really, really accessible to us. And they, we can text them, we can call them, and the one thing they always say to us is, don't be a hero. You do not need to be a hero in this situation. If you're uncomfortable, if something is iffy, get out. And they're very supportive of that. And so that's really good. And
I would say what's equally important there is that these two, our producers, are just amazing at communicating that down the chain. So it comes from the seniors, it comes from the executives, and then it comes right to me saying, do you feel like we need security right now? We'll get security. Do we need to change hotels? We'll do that. Do you need to leave this shoot because you are traumatized? We'll fly you
We
out.
have those
You know.
conversations.
And I think it's important that whoever's directing from the assignment desk, for instance, who's directing those crews or the producers, that they have field work experience. For instance, I could be calling the shots from sitting in Miami, right? But if I don't know, if I hadn't been in some of these circumstances throughout years of experience, I probably would say, no, it doesn't matter. You better stay there. You better get me that shot. You better get me, that when they throw the gas canisters or, the people screaming at each other. But I always try to tell my reporters, like he said, stay there up to the time you feel comfortable. Do not be a hero. We don't need heroes. Try to get your story, but at the end of the day, it's important that they come back home.
I just want to acknowledge that we're slightly over time, but since we started a couple of minutes late, I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and let us go about 5 minutes more. Next question. We probably only have time for like one question from each side, so the rest of you will have to come up afterwards. Go
I'll
ahead.
try to be quick. Thank you all so much for coming and for both of your pieces. They're both amazing. I used to live in Charlottesville, so your piece really hit home. My question is, what do we do about this? Like Professor Cross mentioned the issue of raising publicity and giving publicity to these people, but you were both very strong in your editorial decisions that your audience needed to know about this, and it's something that's on the rise and we need to know about. But what do we do, like, as citizens? Like, what do we do to counter this or to deal with it?
I'd like to know what your answer to that is. I think it's important for this film, and just in the conversations I've had, is just raising awareness about, if you're not going to these rallies, and some of them are very small. There's like 12 people walking around in KKK garb around a statue, and the first one in Charlottesville was much smaller than this past one. But I think the awareness that this is raised, that films like this can raise now, it leaves it up to everybody in this room to decide, okay, like, I'm woke to this now, and what do I do about it? Because you can't do nothing, right? You can't do nothing. So I think I just want people to really, if there's any takeaway tonight about what we've talked about, is to go home and think about what you do want to do about it, because you have to do something.
I have it like straight in my mind. As long as out there is corruption, injustice, crimes, there is journalism, and we have to do our job.
Okay. Wow.
Hi, thank you. You guys do look like heroes. It's kind of crazy. You keep saying don't be a hero. I am one of the people that thought that this didn't exist, and I have a really basic question. Like, what is the alt-right? What is white supremacy? What is KKK? Are they all the same thing? Alt-right was in the papers one day. Nobody ever told me what it was.
Okay, who wants to explain alt-right?
They're different.
Alt-right's kind of like a euphemism, isn't it?
Yes, this is a good lesson in do not use euphemisms. What is the alt-right? Let's call it what it is. What is it?
I mean, it's everything you've just described. It's all the violence you've seen at Trump's rallies during the campaign. It's all the anger, the disaffected, white unemployed people in America. I mean, it's just a lot of anger and hatred that's clearly misdirected, and how it's organized. You saw at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. It was called Unite the Right. They left slightly fractured, but it's a lot of people. It's a mix. There's the old KKK people. There's the David Dukes, and they're identifying with the popularity of younger people online, meme culture, who are organizing more organically.
That would be the main difference between what you historically think of as the KKK and the alt-right is aesthetics. Mm-hmm. You're not wearing a white hood. You're not covering yourself. You are out there. You want to look presentable. You want to look middle or upper middle class. You want to be strong and in shape. You want people to want to be like you, and to sort of not, I mean, obviously you're threatened by them, but the idea is like we're less threatening. We're not hiding ourselves. We're proud to say this. I would say that is the sort of main difference.
And though they're also doing torchlit marches through campuses, they're not just burning
They
crosses.
do all share
You know,
an
they're doing press
antipathy
conferences.
towards Jews and people who are not
Everyone.
Aryan whites.
And
Right.
they do feel as if the white race is under attack.
That was my other question.
That that they need to stand up for the white race because the country's been taken over by all of us.
They say white genocide.
Yeah, and that they need to stand up and stand together because their numbers are dwindling according to them, and their race is gonna be extinct. I don't know, but they kept on telling us, if you continue to tear down our statues, if you continue to come in numbers, we're gonna get violent. And that was the woman. That was Amanda.
That was
Barker.
Amanda.
The one that was like, watch your mouth.
Yeah,
That's his wife.
Thank you.
All right, all right.
One quick question.
One question. Both of you ask your questions at the same time, and we'll take them at the same
Ex-journalists
time. All right.
working in international news, we hear President said many sides, right? That's the word that sparked a lot of huge controversy. But as a journalist, you have a natural instinct to kind of curious that what's the other side of the story, right? And then we start to hear about, the extreme left and the Antifa, right? And then my question for you is that, have you thought about what does it mean to provide a full picture by covering the other side, the extreme left? And ABC come out with a piece putting the extreme left and extreme right leaders they found face to face, and just wonder, what does that mean to provide full picture? Do you have any interest to do a profile or continue on the documentary by bringing the other side?
Okay, and then what's your question?
At what point does covering alt-right racism, white supremacy, become a platform for hatefulness rather than just reporting? And how do you sift through the noise of how everyone else reports their story? You go on Twitter and you're just overwhelmed with all this.
I asked that question
nonsense.
about 3 or 4 times. Do you feel like I didn't ask it?
No.
You didn't hear me ask that question.
So,
Okay.
no, but seriously.
All right, let's start with the first one. One question, because I'm out of time. If you have a second one, come up later. So the first question do journalists owe it to journalism to to examine the the alt left or extreme left as well as the extreme right?
I think we owe it to our audience to show all sides, whatever that may be, whether it's left, right, whatever. And it just happens right now, these white supremacist movements are the ones that are in the spotlight, so that's why we're covering them. They're the ones that went to Charlottesville and killed somebody, not the extreme left. This is the group that did it. So I think we owe it to our audience to bring the news home, and they're the ones making the news because they're the ones that decided that day to go out there and protest, and ultimately somebody lost their life.
Would we be doing any of these stories if Steve Bannon and Spencer were not in the White House? Would we still be doing these stories?
We would.
You would.
Yeah.
Would you, Vice?
I mean, if Trump wasn't in the White House,
maybe not.
I don't know how empowered. I mean,
They think that Trump supports them, right? And so that's created an atmosphere where it's okay to say things that maybe weren't okay to say out loud before. And they've told us that. I mean, we were at dinner with Ellie, and this young alt-righter who she talks to for information said after Trump's comments, man, he really has our back. And so they genuinely feel that. And so the climate right now, politically and socially, sort of lends itself to talking about the alt-right. I think, are we interested in telling Antifa stories? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, we're definitely interested in that. But I do think it's important, like I sort of take issue with this like alt-left and extreme left phrase, because I think there's one fundamental difference, which is one side genuinely thinks that everyone else is not human, and the other side does not think that. I mean, do people create violence in the name of BLM or the left? Sure, but it's not a fundamental principle to being part of it. And so I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, I mean,
But
you're
one
talking about a false
Trump
equivalent.
definitely he capitalized something that was there.
Right.
He capitalized, and they like him.
They like him, but they called him a
hate
coward.
They called him a coward.
They said he hadn't gone far enough to the Klansmen that we interviewed, they said that he was a coward and that he had not gone far enough.
Well, journalists, there are plenty of stories in here for you all to cover. Thank you very much. Zachary Caldwell, cameraman from Vice. Josh Davis, producer. Tracy Jarrett, producer. Ilya Calderon, correspondent. Maria Martinez Guzman. Thank you all. Welcome to the J School.